Men their rights and nothing more, women their rights and nothing less. That was all Susan B. Anthony, a women's activist, ever wanted. Woman inferiority began when the world began. Woman inferiority is found in many religions, and most commonly in older religions. Since men are physically more capable than women, men were in charge of the hunting and the physical labor, while women were gatherers and completed household chores. Women were also thought to be less intellectual than men, but this is because only men were allowed to receive an education for a very long time, and women did not have time for an education. Women were not just seen as inferior, but they are also seen as malevolent and a source of temptation. There are many documentations of this within religion, such as in Greek mythology, a woman named Pandora opened a forbidden box, leading plagues to the human race. There is also an account in the Holy Bible where a woman by the name of Eve ate a forbidden apple, consequently bringing sin into this world for forever. The treatment of women in the East around India was considered much better. Women were allowed to own property and their own individual freedoms. This changed slightly when Hinduism came into play. After Hinduism was introduced, women would obey their husbands and be forced to walk behind them. In England, women who were unmarried had more rights than married women. In England, if you chose to be married, and in many cases the marriage was arranged, you basically gave up your identity and all that belonged to you now belonged to your husband. Women worked mostly inside of the home until about the 19th century. After some quit working within the house, they would have jobs in factories and textile mills, where the conditions were horrifying. These conditions caused laws to be made on how many hours women could work a day. This caused many women to lose their jobs or to not be hired because of this time restraint. As women became more credited and educated, discrimination in some areas endured. This is when women began to take serious action. The women realized that they were capable of just as much as a man, if not more in some areas. They also knew that they were still being discriminated against and that they didn't have equal rights and equal opportunities that they wanted, and they knew they deserved.
Woman's inferiority started at birth when the doctors announced, "It's a girl." After marriage, women didn't have the right to own any of their property or sign a contract, much less have a vote. Women couldn't have their own opinion or thought that was different from their husbands. They were always taught to refrain from education, no public speaking, not even traveling alone. Women were used only as an object of beauty, always physically and mentally inferior to men. It was expected that women had no other interests or desires in anything but raising and looking after their family and husband. They were only expected to do feminine skills such as singing, embroidery, cooking, knitting, etc. Women have been taught, for us, the earth is flat, and if we were to venture out, we would fall off the edge. If the Constitution states that all men are created equal, why were women being so mistreated?
Most men wanted to stay the provider and be the leader of the family, and if women had the same rights as they did, they thought it might disturb that. But there were some men that wanted women's rights. Women should have justice as well as praise, and if she does not dispense with either, she can better afford part with the latter than the form. Frederick Douglass. Women, however, like the colored man, will never be taken by her brother and lifted to a position. What she desires, she must fight for. Frederick
There were many
Douglass.
women who disagreed with the ideas of not letting women vote or have the basic rights that men had. There was one woman, however, who decided to take matters into her own hands. Her name was Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and she decided that enough was enough. So she wrote a letter to Congress saying how it was unfair to give men women's rights and that are not given to women. Her arguments were based off of American history and discussed the Declaration of Independence. She argued that women were not inferior, rather they were superior and should be granted access to the political arena and the rights that men have that women do not. "I know nothing but women and their disfranchised," said Susan B. Anthony. Susan Brown Anthony was born on February 15, 1820. She was one of 8 children and was born into a very strict Quaker family. She was in the temperance movement, which was one of the first expressions of original feminism in the United States, and it dealt with the abuses of women and children who suffered from alcoholic husbands. In 1872, Susan demanded that women would be given the same civil rights and political rights that had been given to black males under the 14th and 15th Amendments. She then led a group of women to the polls in Rochester to test the right of women to vote. From then on, she campaigned endlessly for a woman suffrage amendment through the National Women's Suffrage Association and the National American Women's Suffrage Association.
The women's suffrage movement was a major impact in this country. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were a very huge part of this problem in the 1900s on this movement. But the problem had been around since 1776. Like Abigail Adams had stated a long time ago, if particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. On August 26, 1920, the 19th Amendment passed, stating that the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of gender. Women are extremely excited about this amendment passing, but the men had trouble adjusting. They spoke out and thought women had done nothing for our country. Little did the men know how much women have done since then. They now haven't only been able to vote, but they have been able to represent our country by participating in government.